All right, my name is Julia Genrich, and I'll be presenting on this image of a young girl holding a flower demonstrating against the Vietnam War by Mark Ribot. So this image by Mark Ribot is an image shot at an anti-war protest against the Vietnam War on October 21st, 1967, at a rally known as the March Against the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. The girl in this photo was later identified as Jan Rose Casimir. At this point in time, America was engaged in the Vietnam War, which pitted the communist North Vietnam against South Vietnam, who was allied with the U.S. This war greatly divided the American people, who saw significant losses of young men and women who were drafted to fight. Ribot was a photojournalist who worked at the Magnum Photo Agency with famous photographers such as Henry Cartier Benson and Robert Capa. Ribot was famous for finding grace and beauty in everyday people who were caught in turbulent moments. Ribot's image of girl holding a flower was published in Time magazine. Ribot recalls the event as she was just talking, trying to catch the eye of the soldiers, maybe trying to have a dialogue with them. I had the feeling the soldiers were more afraid of her than she was of the bayonets. Ribot's image captures a moment of tension between two powerful forces, created by the juxtaposition between a hard armed forces and the innocent flower child. This moment narrates a desperate attempt for honest communication and understanding. The subject, Jan Rose Casimir, talks about this moment of realization. All of a sudden, I realized then was the soldier in front of me, a human being I could easily have been going out on a date with. It wasn't a war machine, it was just a bunch of guys with orders. Right then, it went from being a fun, hip trip to a painful reality. This tension represented in the photo also echoes the thought that the country was in a place, making young girl holding a flower an iconic image of anti-war movement. The photograph is using line to create a focal point, which is the flower. The rifles and the bayonets all point towards the flower and the woman holding it. This focal point is supported by the gaze of the woman, which is on the flower. A shallow depth of field also blurs out the background, so it doesn't take away from that focal point of the photograph. Lastly, the diagonal of Casimir's arm also points to that flower. All these things shift the viewer's gaze to the flower, which is a symbol of peace during the war, and that hits a tone for the photo. This photo has a sort of underlying emotional balance to it. The left side of the photo depicts the powerful United States Armed Forces with their bayonets, drab attire, and whereas the right side of the photo gives a sense of innocence. This innocence is supported by a woman holding a small flower in front of her face, as if trying to distract the people on the left from the matter at hand. Although the photo juxtaposes the U.S. military against the young girl, the tone of it does not feel threatening due to the depiction of the flower, which creates a sense of inspiration of hope. A sense of unity can be seen in the soldiers on the left. All are depicted in nearly identical poses, with their left hands holding their rifles, muzzles and bayonets pointed upwards, and their eyes looking straight ahead. They are all wearing the same fatigues as well, topped off with helmets on their heads. The intended interpretation of this photo was to illustrate the emotional divide that was happening with the American people. People had an immense distrust for the government and seriously questioned if American lives should be risked to fight this fight. People felt unheard, and at this point Americans were seeing violence at home because of protests against the war. This photo, I think, brings into question how can protesters stand up for what they believe, but still promote peace and compassion. Some saw the anti-war movement as acts of disloyalty to the boys in Vietnam and viewed it as a counterculture. People with this opinion would have viewed this image with negative emotional response, while others would see it as a humanizing element with the young girl begging for peace and understanding. Vietnam is said to be the first televised war. Up to this point, journalists and photojournalists were somewhat censored for fear that the harsh realities of war would bring down the country's morale. Young Girl Holding a Flower appeared in the American publication of Time magazine in 1967 for all the world to interact with. However, Time magazine does have a specific demographic. According to Brendan Galley, a marketing expert, Time attracts mainly educated males with the age of 50. This image, however, became a famous icon for the flower power movement. This movement symbolizes flowers as an idea of peace, which was made popular by the Beat Generation poet Allen Ginsberg. In his essay, How to Make a March Spectacle, Ginsberg describes the use of flower imagery as a symbol to change the attitude of war protest to one of critical thought and peace instead of violence. Georgetown University history professor Michael Kazin also states, one of the reasons that the photo became so famous is that there was an effort to talk to soldiers, to convince them to throw down their guns and to join us. This is also one of the first rallies that resulted in extreme violence. Soldiers and federal agents lobbed tear gas into the crowds, trying to force them away from the building. 681 protesters were arrested, and dozens were beaten as they pushed towards the Pentagon steps. This photo marks a time in history when the American people were up in arms for peace, which drew the world's attention like never before. Ribot captures this moment of tension and tenderness that is still referenced today as people stand for passion, bravery, and understanding.